Greetings and welcome to the International Science Festival's digital program. My name is Fredrik Ekenvi, and today I have the great pleasure of introducing our speaker of the day. Anna Gavanas is a social anthropologist with a focus on dance music history, working life, migration, and welfare politics. Today's lecture is called Draupner, Love and Wicked. There is a chat where you can ask questions if you have any, and for those of you that are currently in Hyperworld, please use the Vimeo chat as we are not able to see any questions that are asked through that chat. The stage is yours, Anna.
Thank you, Fredrik, and thanks for joining, everyone. My name is Anna Gavanas, and I am a social anthropologist, but I also approach this topic from a lifelong passion and for music. And it started already when I was a kid and I went to the youth recreation center's disco in the early 1980s, when I became fascinated with electronic dance music culture, and then I moved into the DJ booth and started to DJ in the 1990s. And since then, I've been involved in many different levels in electronic dance music and DJ culture. I've started produce my own music and co-founded a record label, Meerkat Recordings. And I also written a couple of books that you see there on the screen. Like for example, lately with Anna Öström, Tillbaka till underjorden. And also Från discofeber till rave-hysteri that came a couple of years ago. But then in general, I've been interested in processes when dance music cultures like disco, house, and jungle, when they travel from original settings where they first are created, like London and New York and Chicago, and what happens on the way to other contexts, like for example Stockholm and Göteborg. And also lately I've been interested in historical perspectives and life course trajectories of participants in dance music scenes, and the relation between social and political processes and dance music scenes. So today I will talk about the Göteborg underground scenes, female trajectories, and shifts in cultural politics. And the starting point for my curiosity for this topic was an article by UK cultural studies scholar Angela McRobbie, who wrote about the neoliberal turn in the UK rave scene in the 1990s, where she wrote that the level of self-generated economic activity that dance, party, rave organization entailed served as a model for many of the activities that were a recurrent feature of creative Britain in the 1990s. Find a cheap space, provide music, drinks, videos, art installations, charge friends and others at the door, learn how to negotiate with police and local authorities, and in the process, become a club promoter and cultural entrepreneur. And I was interested, is this also the case in Sweden, that this happened when neoliberalism came into the Swedish cultural politics? There's not much research yet about this, but I saw similar research in a Swedish context in a book about the Hultsfred Festival, which was a punk festival, and also the do-it-yourself participants there, which I will get into shortly. But the material that this presentation is based on comes from this book, Tillbaka till underjorden, which I co-wrote with my friend and colleague Anna Öström. And we did an interview study with participants in the early Swedish underground electronic dance music scenes of the 1980s and 90s. We made these interviews between 2018 and 2022. And we interviewed about 100 people who were involved as DJs, MCs, decorators, and organizers, and dancers, and what have you. We interviewed them retrospectively about the scene in the 1980s and 90s in 3 locations, Göteborg, Malmö, and Stockholm, and in 3 scenes, rare groove, rave, and jungle. And 30 of these interviewees were female participants, which also mirrors the underrepresentation of women in these scenes at the time. So the content then of today's presentation is divided into 2 parts. First, I will talk about the emergence of some legendary clubs in Göteborg, in the underground scenes, the clubs Funkhouse and Draupner. And secondly, I will talk about the gendered labor division and trajectories of female participants in the 80s and 90s electronic underground, and the life perspectives, which is something that's missing in previous cultural studies research that only tends to focus on so-called youth subcultures and these type of music scenes as something that only goes on in a youth phase of people's lives. So when it comes to the emergence of the electronic underground in Göteborg, the rare groove and rave and jungle scenes, they were brought from the UK by pioneers who traveled between Göteborg and London. There was a direct ferry between Göteborg and London at the time, in the 80s and 90s. And they were inspired by the new sounds, styles, and dance cultures. And this occurred during the peak of the so-called folkhemmet, or the people's home of social democracy, where cultural policies prioritized and funded associations in the so-called Förenings-Sverige, which provided an infrastructure and venues for cultural life as an alternative to the commercial sector. And so municipal youth recreation centers in Sweden were significant indirectly as breeding grounds for dance music culture and underground culture. Many legends, many legendary DJs in Sweden from the 1960s and onwards started their careers at youth recreation centers. For example, here you see on the pictures Mikro with his Mikro crew, breakdance crew in the early 1980s at the Serbian Association in Göteborg. And he later went on and became a professional DJ, and he still is a professional DJ in Göteborg. But he started out at the Youth Recreation Center. And then you also have had migrant cultural associations, indirectly beneficial to the emerging underground club culture, and cultural associations and spaces. For example, carnival and jazz and art associations, which were founded by underground pioneers and became platforms for the emerging underground scene. For example, we have the underground club Funkhouse that started at a tanning salon or solarium in Göteborg at Stigbergsliden in 1985. You see here one of the founders, Gunilla Godmamma Leavitt, with also a flyer from the Scandinavian Funk Club, which was an association that they started. But the sort of impetus for this club was that in 1985, there was a couple of African students in Göteborg, Victor Carl Jumole and his friends. They tried to go out and enjoy the nightlife in Göteborg, in the central city, but they were declined to enter the clubs because of racist policies. And so therefore they said, oh, we don't mind, we just start our own club. And then founded first Funkhouse and then the Scandinavian Association, which became a legendary club in Sweden and kicked off and pioneered the funk scene in Göteborg, where young musicians who later became superstars had some of their first gigs, like, for example, Leila K, Stone Funkers, and Papa D, and Dr. Alban. So they started at the Tannin Salon, and then later they moved to Ingenjörsgatan 3, which was in the more central part of Göteborg, Kungshöjd. And they played funk and blues and soul, and they had many DJs, like, for example, then Gunilla Godmamma Leavitt, and also Paul Henningsson, who went on and co-founded the club Irland at Nefertiti in Göteborg with Sven-Erik Nilsson in 1992. And they were influenced also by London, like Victor Carl went there a lot to buy records and enjoy the nightlife and get inspired by the nightlife there. They were influenced by rare groove and acid jazz from London at Club Irland. And so, the Godmamma Leavitt, Gunilla Godmamma Leavitt, she was an alti-allo there at Funkhouse. And so she worked at the door, she decorated, she coordinated everything, and she also was instrumental at the radio show that they started. She said that after this she went on to become a web designer in 93, and also she moved to the US in 96 and started to design web pages for different organizations. She was involved in gay and lesbian issues as an activist, and she started working with knit with a knit yarn shop and a knit doctor, making sort of creative solutions and designs. And she just went on after this, running her own businesses, and lately she also creates other creative businesses, like fireworks. She's into that business these days. But she says, in retrospect of her life course trajectory, that you learn to collaborate and socialize with all kinds of different people you wouldn't otherwise have crossed paths with. As an all-around worker at Funkhouse, I did everything that needed to be done, and I have continued in the same way since then. If I hadn't done a lot of things at Funkhouse, I probably wouldn't have been able to imagine that I would do all I've done since then. Nowadays, I mostly go out to burlesque shows and drag shows. At these clubs, I make props for artists whom I become friends with. I don't know why I can't just sit in the audience. I have to participate and make something. So she still has this sort of creative urge. She's still moving on. And also another legendary club in Gothenburg in the early underground was Draupner. And they recently published a book with the members of this legendary club, written and edited by Elisabeth Tegner and Åsa Wolf. And there was it's a club. It was a club in Gothenburg at Pusterviksgatan, and it was active between 86 and 88. And Elisabeth, who you see there dancing on one of the pictures to the right, with the guy with the mustache. She was hostessing at the club, and she's been since then been involved in computer game development and education, and she also became a grad student in ethnology and started the Rave Archive. So she was one of the pioneering rave researchers, along with also one of the pioneering club organizers. And at Draupner, they played post-punk, house, and funk, and also live bands were playing there, like their house bands, Union Carbide, Stovefunkers, and Attentat. And they also booked international bands like Swans, Skinny Puppy, and the John Mayall blues band. So, and then moving on to the second part, which is about the female pioneers and the gender division of labor and the career paths during the neoliberal shift. Even though women have been invisible in many ways from these decades, they played an important role for the development of club cultures and electronic dance music scenes in the 80s and 90s as primarily decorators, promoters, clubwear importers, shop owners, dancers, designers, writers, photographers, door staff, many very, very significant, indispensable, but forgotten supportive roles. And the sociologist Howard Becker, he argues in his classic book Art Worlds from 82 that so-called support personnel are fundamental to the creation of artistic works and scenes. And drawing upon Becker, the ethnomusicologists Lund and Trodman, they wrote a book that was published in an edited volume that was published in 2022, where they discussed the female participants who were part of the organization at the Hultsfred Festival, which was sort of part of a punk collective. And the Hultsfred Festival was active between 1986 and 2017. And they wrote a chapter in the book called The Hultsfred Festival, Punk Ethos, Festival Spirit, and Entrepreneurship. And they say that despite the do-it-yourself punk ethos at the Hultsfred Festival, male organizers had the prestigious and visionary roles as the curators of the festival lineup, while the female organizers tended to work in administration, food services, and other supporting functions. So, gender division of labor reproduced the historically established distinctions between male creativity and female support, is one of the points that they make here. And this is also something that we have seen in our book, Tillbaka till underjorden, that we can see parallels in the Swedish electronic dance music scene of the 1980s and 90s, where men primarily were fronted as DJs and club promoters, but women worked a bit behind the scenes as decorators, dancers, and costume makers, and they worked in PR. And then I will mention 3 examples from the interviews that we made for our book Tillbaka till underjorden. Malena, Elinor, and Kajsa from the Gothenburg underground, who, well, their life trajectories are, well, they represent basically representatives of many of these 30 interviewees that we covered in the book. Firstly, we have Malena. She was a seamstress and a designer, and she started the underground queer club Love with Patrik Flodin at Magasinsgatan at the end of the 80s in Göteborg, and she made costumes for performers at the club, and she was influenced by trips to London and Paris, and the skills that she acquired during her working life and in the early underground scenes presumably became crucial for both the success of these club nights and in further professional working life at her own design and fashion company, where she'd worked ever since. And then also another example is Elinor, who decorated backdrops in the early Swedish rave movement, together with her association and collective Mandala, at, for example, Club Planet at Packhuset in Göteborg. So she then moved on to start the rave fashion shop Ballagan in 96 at Magasinsgatan, and then she moved on to Citypassagen and then to Kyrkogatan. And this was a sort of a hub for the rave scene at the time, where you could sort of find out what was happening in the scene and get flyers and tickets. In 2003, Elinor, she decided to close her shop, and then she moved on to work in sales as a decorator and graphic designer with her own graphic design company, and she's still active as a graphic designer. So in a sense, you could say that her aesthetic skills and do-it-yourself experience, they transferred to a career in the cultural industries later on. And then the third example, where we have, let's see, I can show you a picture by the way, of Elinor before I go on to the third example, which is Kajsa. Here is Elinor in her shop. Anyways, Kajsa, she lived in London in the early 90s, in 93, when the jungle scene broke through. And she was part of the early scene there in London, but she came from Gothenburg, but she got really involved in the scene in London, and she did some voluntary work there for a magazine called Prestige, where she covered the jungle scene. And then she ran out of money. She didn't get paid for her work, and so she moved back to Gothenburg, and she sort of introduced the jungle scene when she came back to Gothenburg, and she started the jungle club called Wicked in 96 with her friends Leif Arnold and Mariella Petralia. And she brought DJs and MCs from London that she booked at this club Wicked at Nefertiti, and she also imported jungle records. So she was also uh, one of those early pioneers in the underground scene in Gothenburg. And then in the late 1990s, Kajsa moved on to work as a TV journalist for a music channel, ZTV, where she did music features. Today, she still works as a journalist, and she is also still active as an artist that still draws a lot of inspiration from the underground scene and exhibits in collaboration with the underground scene, music scene. And so the skills and knowledge that she acquired in the jungle scene, they were conducive to her career in the media industries, one could say, and also to her further creative life. If you see this in a life course perspective. So then all this took place. I mean, these examples that I've mentioned of clubs and pioneers and all kinds of do-it-yourself workers. It took place in the late 80s and 1990s, where Swedish cultural policies started to shift from a focus on anti-commercialism and socioeconomic redistribution and social issues toward neoliberalism, which meant to reposition the creative and cultural industries as sectors promising urban regeneration and economic growth and a promotion of entrepreneurialism. For example, we interviewed Per, which was a DJ and club organizer in Stockholm, about the transformation that the club economy underwent in the early 1990s and how it affected the conditions in the underground scene. And he said that in the 1980s, when he started out doing warehouse parties, she started. They had collectives and they built everything from scratch. I mean, they had to build a bar. It was not like at a venue where there was a bar, or there was just like they took over like industrial spaces, and they had to build everything. It took a lot of time and effort, and then they have to take everything down for every party that they did. They planned it for months, but later on in the 90s, it became more practical to promote clubs in existing commercial venues where you could just show up. And there was also that there was a demand for this type of musical activities and scenes. And he says that in the 1990s, everything became sponsored and one could get prepaid. And it was much easier to organize clubs. Cultural entrepreneurs started to promote clubs in various spaces, and companies started to sponsor club organizers. And there was a lot more money in the commercial club industry. So from the 1990s and onwards, many DJs became self-employed entrepreneurs, and they combined DJing with other activities like producing music, running record or clothing labels, organizing club nights, and the do-it-yourself underground became part of the media, design, and fashion industries. However, you could also, some of us still remember that in the early 1990s, there was also an economic crisis in Sweden, which affected the conditions for commercial actors and also highlighted the precariousness of cultural life in the volatile marketplace. So, to come to the conclusion, which were the social and political conditions when the rare groove, rave, and jungle scenes traveled to Sweden? What kind of context received these scenes when they traveled from London via these pioneers? And also, what happened to the pioneers of the do-it-yourself underground in Sweden, and specifically Gothenburg, and as cultural politics started to move in a market-oriented and entrepreneurial direction, and which were the gendered implications of all this, given the gender distribution of labor. Firstly, when it comes to the infrastructure that received these influences, migrant and cultural associations were indirectly beneficial to the emergent Gothenburg underground and provided infrastructure to the Swedish underground club culture in the 80s and early 1990s, as we have seen in these examples, and many more. And secondly, support personnel have been instrumental to the club revolution. For example, dancers and decorators and fashion and flyer designers. And thirdly, as a result of their skills and contribution within a gendered labor division, some female pioneers were in a position to launch do-it-yourself careers out of their previous unpaid work as they moved on and continued their creative work in design, fashion, media, and retail and club promotion. And then fourthly, the creative dispositions in the 1980s and 1990s underground scenes, they have lived on as participants moved into adult lives and transform subcultural capital into cultural and economic capital and careers in the cultural industries and continue their creative lives. As an end note, I can also conclude that today's celebrities in the Swedish music scene, they owe their careers to supporting an often forgotten female and migrant underground pioneers and subcultural entrepreneurs, because they enabled spaces where alternative music could be played and danced to and experienced in all their dimensions in terms of styles and fashion and everything and aesthetics at a time where Swedish popular music scene was dominated by pop and rock music and also Swedish media. This was a very sort of under the radar phenomenon at the time in the 80s and 90s. So I guess I will end there. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you, Anna, for a wonderful lecture.
Thank you.
There doesn't seem to be any questions from the audience, so I'd like to thank you all for watching, and huge thanks to you, Anna, for coming here and giving us this very interesting lecture. Be sure to check out our other lectures that starts at 6 p.m. every day, except on Sunday when it starts at 3 p.m. and 6 p.m. And you can do that by using the same link that got you here. Thank you, everyone.